Imagine a future where you have a Moody's rating for compute, just like for stocks and bonds where it's AAA or BB, but it's not going to be generically applied across an entire cloud provider. It's not going to say AWS is AA. It's going to say for mixture of experts workload with this set of parameters, AWS, this data center with this zip code is AAA. CoreWeave is AA. And now you can more effectively determine what you're willing to pay for that thing. Maybe not everyone needs AAA. So that's our vision for where it goes. Hi everyone, I'm Simeon. I'm the co-founder CEO of Compute Exchange. I'm a proud sponsor and initiator of DEMi back about a year ago. 6 months ago I came to DEMi 2 while we were still in stealth and talked about how AI is killing innovation. And 6 months later, unfortunately, that's still occurring. Now, what I mean by that is not that AI itself is killing innovation, but the ways that we're deploying AI that is highly expensive, capacity constrained, and controlled by very few individuals is what's killing innovation. And to give you a quote from just this morning, Masayoshi Son, one of the architects behind the Stargate initiative that Burns and others have talked about, at his board meeting said that over the next few years, about $4 trillion of revenue is going to be made in the AI industry, and it is going to be captured by a single-digit number of companies. That was today. If I cannot motivate further this point about high control, then I encourage you to join one of those companies. Now, we came to DEMi 2 and we presented a vision for how access to compute should be open. Today, too many companies, and actually, in fact, all of them, are competing based on giving you access to the resource, not based on access being open and all the value add on top being where the competition is happening. Think about the internet, and think about if there were 200 different protocols for how the internet would connect our individual devices together. I'm pretty sure that the internet would not have become ubiquitous like it did. We had one TCP/IP standard open protocol for the internet. We're proposing something similar in compute. That's what we talked about 6 months ago. But now, we haven't just sat on our hands. In the last 4 months, we launched our product, and we've had over $2 billion of supply of compute in the market. To put a number that's not just a dollar figure behind this, that's around 80,000 NVIDIA GPUs available in an open exchange for anyone to freely bid on. No salesperson in the way, no talking to this company about what the price should be or that company about negotiating a different price. You set the price for this $2 billion worth of compute. And that's just where we're getting started. Now, I want to talk today about what's actually blocking a truly open future and one where access to intelligence, not just compute, is democratized, hence the name of this summit. So first, I'm going to go through each of these fairly quickly and then go into each one in more detail. Compute today remains a black box. When you buy a GPU from one company versus another, even if it's called H100 or B200, it's not the same. And even within the same company, depending on the data center, the hardware BOM configuration, the software configuration, the same GPU is actually very different. That makes it next to impossible to efficiently allocate workload demand with supply. The second is vendor lock-in. We're not here saying that all the big companies are bad. No, in fact, they're investing most of the money and putting most of the risk capital out there for us to work. But what we are saying is that some behaviors are anti-competitive, others are much more fair. An example of an anti-competitive behavior is having data egress cost an arm and a leg, but data ingress be free, right? That's controlling the flow and access of data in an anti-competitive way. Third, unused capacity. I'll talk about that a bit later. Contract complexity as well. A lack of access. When 3 companies in the world control 80% of the global supply of compute outside of China, you have new gatekeepers, right? And then that leads to concentration of access, and ultimately, what we're ultimately trying to do is make compute much more standardized and commoditized. So let me break down each of these. To reduce a black box, we're going to implement benchmarking, and we're going to talk about how we're doing that with NVIDIA. Under vendor lock-in, we're going to introduce standards that come in after benchmarking. Under unused capacity, we're going to talk about our compute battery concept, which is a layman's term for market futures and forwards and derivatives. We've already solved some of the contract complexity by having one unified set of legal terms. In terms of lack of access, we're pushing for open source, and which is why we're here. On concentration of access, we think that a competitive market and one where people can compete on fair terms will lead to more innovation than we currently see. And then finally, obviously, if something's too heterogeneous, you want to make it more homogeneous. So we'll talk about each of those. So we're going to start with market mechanisms, concentrated access. I like to say that markets are Darwinian by their very nature. What does that mean? It means that the moment you allow multiple parties to compete in a fair way, you actually have fair competition and efficiencies. We see this whether it's the equities markets, whether it's the commodities markets. We even see it in the models. When OpenAI releases a new model, you see that the competition, whether it's DeepSeek, Anthropic, Mistral, et cetera, is narrowing the gap between the leading model and the lagging model. Competition works, and we've tried to build a market mechanism so that there can be true, fair competition in compute. The next one, benchmarking. This is a major announcement that we're going to release in the coming week or two. Right now, there is one or two real benchmarking solutions out there. One is called ML Commons, right? And the other one is the semi-analysis Cluster Max program that came out. Both are great initial steps in the right direction, but we think both fall short of where we need to go. Why? We think a benchmark should be open. A benchmark should have been defined by the people in this room as well as the large companies, not by individuals in those kind of walled gardens. And third, it should be something that we can push for wider adoption of in the industry and that has checks. ML Commons is all self-reported information. On the Cluster Max program, while we have more information about how those benchmarks are being developed, it is still a very closed program and one that ties the performance of an entire compute company to one number, right? Is it platinum, gold, or silver? And you lose a lot of the nuance. What we propose is a benchmark that's based on an open standard where you can actually measure the performance of a data center down to the rack level and then map that to a type of workload to more efficiently measure workload against compute type, where we move away from a generic, here's just an H100, to here's an H100 with this hardware BOM, this software spec, against workload type A, B, and C. The natural progression from benchmarks is then to come up with a standard. So think about oil and gas. You have standards in oil and gas that relate to how many gallons of oil are in a barrel, right? Someone defined that standard. You have standards around what is the octane level of unleaded, premium, plus jet fuel, and the industry coalesced around those. Today in AI infrastructure, those standards don't exist at all. In fact, each company is trying to develop their own competing standard and push it out, in some cases, in an anti-competitive way. And so with the announcement around benchmarking, the next step is going to be the development of open standards. And we've combined a group of 10 companies, several governments, and the list is growing every day, to kind of push this out there. Again, think of TCP/IP for the internet, but now we're doing that for compute. The next one, lack of access. This goes hand in glove with the open standard. What I mentioned earlier is too many companies compete on access to compute as opposed to on the value add on top. The purpose of what we're doing with benchmarking to standards to now open source is to promote an open standard for access to compute, whether that's bare metal or virtualized machines on top. And from there, anything you add on top of that access should be something that companies actively compete on. And then lastly, this compute battery concept. It shocks me that still today, the following three things can all be true. You can have an undersupply of leading edge training chips like GBs. You can have an oversupply of H100s leading to a rapid price decrease month to month. And you can have a tremendous underutilization of compute capacity overall, even when it's been purchased in long-term contracts. This doesn't make sense, and yet it's true. One way to monetize unused capacity is to have an open standard by which you can surface that capacity into a fair market and then put that out there on a duration of an hour, a day, a week, a month, whatever works for your particular need. We call that our compute battery concept, where you can naturally charge up your compute battery when you need more capacity, and you can charge it down when you don't need as much. Right? The simple concept of being able to resell something that you don't need anymore makes a lot of sense and is not possible anywhere outside of Compute Exchange today without going through gates and gatekeepers. And so if any of this is interesting, and I think I'll have time for some Q&A at the end, I encourage you to connect with me. I'll have a QR code where you can do that. There are unique insights that we want to share with as many people as will listen that you literally cannot hear anywhere else. And the reason I say you cannot hear them, if you go and talk to provider A or buyer B, they're going to know about their idiosyncratic set of facts. Hey, I'm using compute from this company, here's my experience. Or, hey, I'm providing compute to these 50 companies, here's my experience. But by building an open market, which is what we've done, we're actually able to aggregate the majority of that market data and information and make it open to the world. And so if you go to the Compute Exchange website, you can see the beginnings of that, which is our compute calculator, where you can see what should one type of provider be charging you against another, not the list price on a website, but the actual price that these deals get done at. And then you can see what we believe is actually the fair price for that thing that you're looking for. And so if that's at all intriguing, talk to me later. And so if I haven't emphasized this enough, what I think is necessary to have democratized intelligence, at least through the computing layer, is a neutral place of exchange where you don't pick winners and losers, transparency so that you know what's actually happening in the market, and ultimately driving towards much more efficiency of compute in the world. And I made a call to action last time I was here, which was that this is a movement. If you're a DEMi, you're part of this movement. We each have individual agency that we can bring by making a small choice for the world, but a big choice for you, such as where do you buy compute? Or how do you build, open or closed? Or who do you even hire on your team, right? And where do you choose to go? Are you going to go and work at Google, or are you going to start a new company and raise some money? Each of those individual major decisions for you and your company make meaningful steps in the movement that we're trying to do to democratize intelligence. And so thanks for sticking around right after lunch. And for those that were here for take 1, 2, and 3, thanks for your patience. All right, I have 8 minutes for questions. Yeah. Any questions?
One question I had was more around the developer experience, right? Like, how do you think about developer experience, right, like on your platform? Specifically, right, like the end user of the compute is still a developer, right? Like, so how do they go about like provisioning compute and using it, right? Like, how do you make sure that that is uniform as well?
Absolutely, it's a great question. It's not just about the hardware, it's about the experience, right? And let me answer that in 2 ways. One, what does it look like today? And we used to work at Apple together, right? So we know that Apple has an internal team that spends quite a lot of money on GPUs as well as on humans to make a developer experience for the Apple engineer. Most companies cannot afford to do that, especially not the startups in this room, right? And so the developer experience today, if you're a startup, tends to be, oh, I'm going to go on one of these clouds. If they offer a software stack, then I'm going to use that. The moment that my price increases and I want to look at something else, I have an entirely different stack of experiences to go after. And it's a form of vendor lock-in, right? That's the reality of the world today. Part of the work of the standards body, because again, it's about access. It's not about all the nice features that come on top, right? Amazon has a lot of great features in Bedrock, right? Just like a lot of the neoclouds have their own things, like token as a service. We're not talking about that. We're talking about what are the core set of features that a developer needs just to do productive work with compute. That should be around an open standard where you're not doing it 20 or actually 100 different ways. That world doesn't exist yet, but that's what we're trying to push out.
I have a question for the compute providers, the folks that you've secured $2 billion worth of compute from. What is their incentive? As in, are you paying them for unused compute? And then, shouldn't they be scared of you because you're threatening their like kind of 5-year, 10-year-long contract lock-ins? So, what's their incentive to like play ball with y'all?
Sure, it's a great question. So, right now, I like to say that a lot of the providers we work with offer ephemeral compute. What does that mean? It means it's idle capacity that's sitting there, or it's capacity that they've sold on short term and they're looking to monetize it on something that's longer term. We're not saying death to the long-term contract by any means. What we are saying is standardize what that contract looks like. And so with Compute Exchange, let's say you're a provider and you said, I only want to sell this thing for 6 months or longer or 1 year or longer. That's totally fine. But then don't lock in that customer from being able to resell that thing, right? And so I'll give you a specific example. Let's say you're a startup founder, you want to buy, let's say 256 H100s, and you only want to buy it for 1 month. The best price to duration that you're going to get is probably right now at 6 to 8 months. So let's say you go for 6. We get you a great rate, and then 2 months from now you say, I don't need it anymore. Well, because from the earlier slide of one standard set of terms, every provider that has listed compute with us has agreed to allow resale, which means you can then put it back on the exchange. The provider's still getting the original amount of money that you agreed to. And if you sell it for less, then you're at least not as much in the hole, and you make up the difference to them. They're no worse off, but you're a lot better off. And it's not rocket science concept, but you just need someone to push that forward. Longer term, I think it's interesting because many people think that the hyperscalers are going to hate this concept. I actually think it allows them to differentiate themselves a lot better because, you know, it's now public at Apple. One of the providers we used to use, or probably still use, AWS. There's a reason for that. They offered the best quality, performance, security standard in the world, and they probably still do, right? That should be much easier for them to be able to communicate out to the world than it is now.
How does the team plan on sort of gathering that benchmark data, giving some of the ephemeral compute that you talked about that you're getting access to? And to what level of granularity you're going to have that, right? Because you could do it based on, you know, a DGX box or a deployment of AMD connected by InfiniBand Fabric for an M300, MI300. Would you also be contemplating things like connectivity that's being used, like the memory subsystems? Like, It seems like it would be such a great thing to be able to pick from a menu of total deployments and have it granular detail for developers to understand how they could get the most for their money.
I'm smiling a little because you're trying to get me to tell you what my press release is going to say, but I kind of let the cat out of the bag, so you heard it here first. So the idea is we want to go from the chip level, right? If you've heard me talk, you'll have heard me say serial number 1 or a million H100 should be the same chip. It's not, because the moment you put it in a different BOM configuration, it changes, right? So we're not going to do this at some abstraction layer up here. It's actually going to be from the BOM level, hardware, what's the storage vendor you're using, and how are they different for that kind of workload than someone else. The networking, the interconnect, the CPU, all of it. That's going to fit into this. And then up to the access layer that we were talking about, just getting access, whether it's through bare metal or VM, the set of minimum viable software tools you need for that. So a scheduler, for example, right? And being able to do it multi-node. There's going to be a piece for that. And then we're going to publish that as an open thing. And once we get adoption of that, which is the goal, which is why we've brought together 10 companies, including NVIDIA, to do this, and we're welcome to have many others as well, we're then going to take that to become a standard, right? There's the benchmark, technical, and then a standard. So imagine a future where you have a Moody's rating for compute, just like for stocks and bonds, where it's AAA or BB. But it's not going to be generically applied across an entire cloud provider. It's not going to say AWS is AA. It's going to say for mixture of experts workload with this set of parameters, AWS, this data center with this zip code is AAA. CoreWeave is AA. And now you can more effectively determine what you're willing to pay for that thing. Maybe not everyone needs AAA. So that's our vision for where it goes.
I was wondering what the timeline on reselling is.
It's already happening. So it's already possible. Anyone that buys a contract, including when we launched in February through Exchange, is able to resell. No one has wanted to yet, but everyone is able to. The importance of startups to make their voice heard when it comes to regulation. I very much appreciate, as a 3-time founder myself, the many different things that are pulling at your attention. But right now is the moment in time when people are listening. I have not heard before, at least in previous iterations, where governments have actually said, I want to hear from you, startups. There's a whole lobbying effort where big companies pay lots of money to be heard. You're hearing that here today. They would like to hear from you. I encourage you, even if it's just 1% of your time, provide a comment. It could go a long way. Thank you.